he's been telling us why Navrat has been telling why there is all this struggle and pain. It's because the way that this manifestation is set up, the divine will has to be worked out in human beings against all the opposing forces. So that brings about a kind of battle. There is a clamor of battle, a tramp, a march, a cry arises like a moaning sea, a desperate laughter under the blows of death, a doom of blood and sweat and toil and tears. Men die that man may live and God be born. An awful silence watches tragic time. Pain is the hand of nature sculpturing men to greatness. An inspired labor chisels with heavenly cruelty an unwilling mold. Implacable in the passion of their will, lifting the hammers of titanic toil, the demiurges of the universe work. They shape with giant strokes their own. Their sons are marked with their enormous stamp of fire. Although the shaping God's tremendous touch is torture unbearable to mortal nerves, the fiery spirit grows in strength within and feels a joy in every titan pang. He who would save himself lives bare and calm. He who would save the race must share its pain. This he shall know who obeys that grandiose urge. The great who came to save this suffering world and rescue out of time's shadow and the law, must pass beneath the yoke of grief and pain. They are caught by the wheel that they had hoped to break. On their shoulders they must bear man's load of fate. Heaven's riches they bring, their sufferings count the price, or they pay the gift of knowledge with their lives. The Son of God, born as the Son of Man, has drunk the bitter cup, owned Godhead's debt, the debt the Eternal owes to the fallen kind. His will has bound to death and struggling life that yearns in vain for rest and endless peace. Now is the debt paid, wiped off the original score. The eternal suffers in a human form. He has signed salvation's testament with his blood. He has opened the doors of his undying peace. The deity compensates the creature's claim. The Creator bears the law of pain and death. A retribution smites the incarnate God. His love has paved the mortal's road to heaven. He has given his life and light to balance here the dark account of mortal ignorance. It is finished, the dread, mysterious sacrifice offered by God's martyred body for the world. Gethsemane and Calvary are his lot. He carries the cross on which man's soul is nailed. His escort is the curses of the crowd. Insult and jeer are his rights acknowledgement. 2 thieves slain with him mock his mighty death. He has trod with bleeding brow the Saviour's way. He who has found his identity with God pays with the body's death his soul's vast light. His knowledge, immortal, triumphs by his death. Hewn, quartered on the scaffold as he falls, his crucified voice proclaims, I am God. Yes, all is God. Peals back heaven's deathless call.
There is a glamour of water that runs much. The tide arise like a morning sea. The display water under the willow of death. The doom of blood and sweat and toil and tears.
You can read the next line also.
And our full
men die.
Men die that man may live and God is born.
Yes. We don't hear this clamor of battle, but I suppose someone who has reached the cosmic consciousness and is carrying all the suffering of the earth within themselves, they hear it like this. They hear this clamor, this noise, battle. And they hear this forward march that's going on all the time. A tramp. It's a heavy way of walking. Of course, it's the way that soldiers walk tramp, but maybe all of us somehow we are on this human journey. So our footsteps, it's like that, a tramp, a march. And there's a kind of appeal, a cry that things should not be like this, things should be better. And if you hear that cry coming from all the human hearts, and it sounds like a great sea, a stormy sea, it's moaning, sad sound. But there's also this laughter, this desperate laughter, even under the blows of death. People who are in very, very desperate situations, somehow they find some kind of ironic laughter, some laughter of courage that keeps them going. And the whole humanity has to face this doom, this fate of blood and sweat and toil and tears. This is a line that Winston Churchill has used in one of his wartime speeches, but we think that Sri Aurobindo wrote it first, and Winston Churchill picked it up out of the airwaves. This is all happening. Individual human beings die in order that man, the race of man, shall live, and that will enable God to be born in the world. We have to make this sacrifice. And of course, Sri Aurobindo was writing this at the time of the conflict, the Second World War, the conflict with Hitler, where he and Mother put all their force behind the Allies because they saw it is so important that if this dreadful movement that is expressing itself, this hostile force that's expressing itself through Hitler and through Stalin, and if this conquers, then human evolution will be delayed for thousands of years, and there will be so much suffering. So they gave up all their other work to concentrate on that. And for that, many people had to die in order that humanity could live, and that will lead eventually to God being born. Kenneth?
An awful silence watches tragic time. Time is the hand of nature sculpturing men to greatness, and inspired labour chisels with heavenly cruelty and unwilling will.
So this line, an awful silence watches tragic time, this stands on its own, This is somehow how human beings experience it. There are disasters and wars and so much suffering going on, and they wonder, what is God doing? Why isn't there a response? This tragic time goes on and on, and there's this awful here doesn't mean it in the way that we use it colloquially in our daily speech. We say, oh, it was just awful. It has to do with awe, that feeling of reverence for something that's too high for us to understand. And then he tells us that pain, all this suffering, is the way that nature is preparing human beings to be great, not just ordinary. Like a sculptor A sculptor has to take a block of stone and chisel it to bring out some beautiful, expressive form. So human beings are supposed to become greater than they are. All of us are supposed to do that. And we will notice that pain, suffering, when we have to face big challenges in our lives, that helps us to become stronger. So, an inspired labor. When a sculptor is making a statue out of a block of stone, he's somehow inspired. He sees what that block of stone should become, and he does his chiseling under the influence of that power of inspiration. In the same way, nature is inspired, she's guided. What is the blows that she has to give? So it's cruelty, of course it's cruelty, but it's a heavenly cruelty. It has a higher purpose. And it has to be so cruel because our material, the material that we are made out of, this unwilling mold, this shape that our earthly being takes, doesn't change easily. It needs big blows, painful blows, for it to change and to learn. This word mold, we use a mold when we want to cast a statue, or when we want to make candles, for instance. We give a form. So Sri Aurobindo has told us that this physical form that we have, and the mental and vital personality that develops in this form, this is a mold for our spirit. Our spirit is formless. In the evolutionary process, it gets cast into form. But this form, of course, is rigid and hard, and it can't readily express what the free spirit needs to express. So that's why he speaks of this unwilling mold. The mold has to be shaped right in order for the great, beautiful, perfect form to be made. Alice, you would read?
Implacable in the passion of their will, lifting the hammers of titanic toil, the demiurges of the universe work. They shape with giant strokes their own. Their suns are marked with their enormous stamp of fire.
Yes. So who's doing all this work? The demiurges of the universe. Sri Aurobindo uses this term in a couple of places in the poem. The demiurges are not God, they are not the creator, but they are powers, cosmic powers, who do his work. And there's more than one of them. I think Mother refers to some such cosmic powers as the formateur, the shapers. So these are cosmic powers. These are the demiurges of the universe. And they are working to shape man to greatness. And they have this passionate will to do their task. So they are implacable. Implacable means merciless. The They are so cruel, apparently. Nothing can soften them because they have to do that work. They have chosen certain individuals for this work, and those individuals, they hammer them and they hew them, they shake with giant strokes their own huge hammers. Their sons, the sons of those demiurges, the ones who they are giving rise to, they are marked with that enormous stamp of fire. They've been shaped like forged metal. Iron has to get heated and then hammered and shaped. It's like that. It goes on.
Although the shaping gods of tremendous touch is torture unbearable to mortal nerves, the fiery spirit grows and screams within, and appears of joy in every titan hand.
Yes. So that tremendous touch of those shaping gods, those demiurges, that's very, very painful to human bodies, to human nerves, unbearable, torture. But because it's being done for a heavenly purpose, the fiery spirit within grows more fiery, more intense. It grows stronger, and it even enjoys, it feels some delight in every pain that it has to feel because it feels it is being shaped for some high purpose. Titan pain, Titan is on this superhuman scale.
He who would save himself lives bad and calm. He who would save the race must share its pain. This we shall know who obeys the grandiose urge.
So there's something in human beings that would like to have freedom from suffering. And there are ways that one can do that, detach oneself. So he who would save himself is concerned with his own individual salvation. He can live, try to live bare and calm, without attachment, without emotions. But he who would save the race, who feels that he wants to contribute to the uplifting of humanity, must share its pain. And Narad says, anyone who obeys that grandiose urge, that's a very noble, great urge to serve humanity, contribute to a better humanity. But everyone who follows that urge, they will realize that they have to share the pain. They won't be able to keep themselves separate and live bare and calm. So this is the grandiose urge that Shraddhavan himself felt that he has to follow. And as a small boy, when he was 11 or so, he had the feeling that there's some great time of change coming for humanity. He has to take part in it. And so he himself has experienced, although he hasn't told us a lot about his personal suffering, he has, what we read in the next pages about the sufferings of the avatar, we can feel that he has experienced all this himself. Secondly,
the great who came to save the suffering world and rescue all of time's shadow and the wall, must pass beneath the yoke of grief and pain. They are caught by the wheel that they had hoped to break. On their shoulders they must bear man's load of faith.
yes. These are the avatars, no? Great beings who come into this world to save it, to uplift it. They come with the aim of rescuing suffering humanity from the shadow of time with its threat of death and this law of pain and suffering. But they themselves have to enter into the human experience and must pass beneath the yoke of grief and pain. So this yoke, that we put across the shoulders to carry a great load. But it's nice also to remember that this word has the same root as the word yoga. So when they come, they are expressing their solidarity, their oneness with suffering humanity, and they take up with that load of pain and grief that is the mortal's lot. They want to break the wheel, the endless wheel of cause and effect of karma. That is what they want to do. They want to bring in the divine grace, no? But because they take on themselves the human load, they are caught in that same wheel as all the rest of us, and they have to carry on their shoulders man's load of fate. I remember when we very first started to read Savitri under the trees on Sunday mornings. In Canto 2 there's a reference to Savitri having to take up this load. And people asked, they said, but she's an embodiment of the Supreme Divine Mother. Why does she have karma? Why does she have a load of the past to carry? And somehow, miraculously, I don't know how it happened, Shraddhavan has pointed us to a sentence in a letter somewhere where he says that even the free souls, if they enter into the human body, they accept the human world. So in that sense, all of them are carrying the load of karma, the load of fate. So this is what Narad is talking about here in this passage.
Here, man's load of fate, each individual's fate also.
We all have our individual load of fate, but we only have it really because we are part of this human race, which has a special task to do in evolution. And we are here, we are mental beings at this particular stage in evolution. So everybody who becomes a human being, they take on part of this load, but they also take on part of the possibility. We were speaking about that last Sunday, I think, that of being the gods from the typal worlds. If they want to experience the psychic being and the possibility of progressing beyond that typal world that they belong to, they have to associate themselves with a human being. And here he's speaking about the saviors, the great saviors who come. And he, in the whole first part of this passage, he refers particularly to Jesus Christ. This is very recognizable here. Josephine, would you read?
Heaven's riches they bring, their sufferings count the price, or they pay the gift of knowledge with their lives.
They are bringing to us all the riches of heaven. They're bringing a gift, but they get punished for it. Their sufferings pay the price of bringing that gift. And they bring a great gift of new knowledge, but they have to pay with their lives. Sri Rama, would you like to read? Yes, please.
The Son of God, born as the Son of Man. First drink the bitter cup, wound or restricted the death the element was to the fallen kind.
Two more lines.
His will is come to death in the failing day, but yet in vain forest and endless peace.
Thank you. So these are two ways that Christ is referred to in the Bible. The Son of God and the Son of Man. And actually he is both. He is the Son of Man in the sense that he has come and been accepted both as a human being and as a representative of the human race. He is the Son of God, like Asvapati is mentioned as a Son of God, in that he is conscious of his divine origin. On the last night before the crucifixion, Jesus went with some of his disciples out of the city into a garden on the hillside, and he asked them to concentrate with him. But they all fell asleep when he woke them up. But somebody has heard him speaking to God then, saying, if it is possible, take this cup away from me. Grant that I don't have to pass through this terrible suffering. But of course he did have to. And then it says he has owned Godhead's debt. The divinity, the divine power, owes something to human beings. Somebody about 6 weeks ago wrote to me about this. She said, we find so much is written here about debt, and how is it that God owes a debt to human beings? But here it is quite clear. It says it's the debt which the Eternal owes to the fallen kind, this fallen race, we created beings, who His will has bound us to death. We have to die, and we have to struggle through our lives. So He's done that to us. So He owes us some help. We are all yearning in vain for rest and endless peace. What is He going to do about it? So the fact that the avatars come down with this urge, this grandiose urge to save the race, it's an acknowledgement from the higher spheres that something must be done to help these struggling beings. So through that sacrifice which the avatar offers, the debt gets paid.
Yes. Now is the debt paid, wiped off the original scorn. The Eternal suffers in a human form He has signed salvation's testament with his blood. He has opened the doors of his undying peace.
Yes. So this is the whole message of Christianity. Christ, who was pure, has come down into this world. He suffered for us. And through that suffering and through that death, he has opened the doors of his undying peace. He has brought a new possibility for spiritual salvation into humanity that wasn't there before. It's now the debt is paid. When you have a debt in a shop, for instance, they'll have a blackboard, they mark it up this much. So when you pay the debt, the score gets wiped off. That's the image here. The debt is paid, the original score has been wiped off. And it's been wiped off because the eternal is suffering along with us in a human form. It's representative form. So there's a testament, there's a contract, an agreement, and he has signed it with his own blood. And in this way, humanity can be saved. He has opened the doors of his undying peace. Congratulations.
The deity compensates, the creator lives, the creator bears the law of pain and death. The retributions meet the incarnate God.
This is how it happens. The divine compensates this claim of these suffering beings that he's created. He pays. Although he's the creator, he bears, he suffers this law of pain and death. He suffers incarnate, in a body. And in that form, this incarnate God, a retribution, a punishment smites him. Punishment for having put us in this awful situation.
Retribution means?
The retribution means paying back, or punishment. Zina.
His love has paved the mortal road to heaven. He has given his life and light to balance here the dark account of mortal evil.
This is what the Saviour does. He paves the road. Perhaps there wasn't even a road. He has to cut the road through and pave it and make it possible for others to follow the road for the mortal creature subject to death, a way that he can enter heaven. He's given, he's sacrificed his life, he's brought his light to balance here the dark account of mortal ignorance. Accounts, again, it's this debt image, no? Something is owed because mortal beings have to suffer ignorance. So he has brought his life and his light to balance the account. Bhavan?
It is finished, the dread mysterious sacrifice offered by God's martyred body for the world. Gethsemane and Calvary are his lot. He carries the cross on which man's soul is nailed. His escort is the curses of the crowd. Insult and jeer are his right's acknowledgement. 2 thieves slain with him mock his mighty death.
You can read the next line also.
He has trod with bleeding brow the Saviour's way.
So we just had Easter, no? It's the festival of Easter commemorates all this. There's this mysterious sacrifice, and it is done. Christ dies, suffers and dies. It is done. It's offered, and this body which he offers is God's own body. Christ becomes a martyr, somebody who sacrifices his life for a divine purpose. So Christ has offered God's martyred body for the world, for the sake of the world. And he, in order to do that, he has to pass through Gethsemane, that is that garden where, knowing that what is coming, he had to spend the night in a kind of foreseeing agony. And then Calvary is the name of the hill where the cross was. And he had to carry that cross, that heavy wooden cross, on his back. And the symbol of the cross is a symbol, of course. It was this dreadful Roman form of punishment, but it's very symbolic in its form. So here Shraddhavan says that man's soul is nailed on that cross. We have to understand that, what this means. What does this mean? The Christian mystics, they also feel that Christ is still there on the cross. The universe is his cross, and that suffering is still going on. So I think Mother has explained that the cross has this up and down line. This is the connection between the divine and the creation, through which the divine force comes down into matter. The cross has an obstacle, which is all the resistance of the world. And because there is this resistance, that downflow of divine love and grace gets blocked. And that is causing all the suffering.
Shraddhavan, there's a meaning by Gethsemane and Calvary?
Well, it refers to these things in the story. You know, after the Last Supper, Christ took a few disciples and he went up into this olive grove. And the name of that garden is Gethsemane. So it is the symbol of his suffering, the suffering of the foreknowledge of what he would have to pass through. And that's where he was arrested also. Judas knew where he was. He took the Romans there to arrest him. And
suffering. Suffering.
The meaning, the suffering, yes. The agony, yes. In the gospel story, this agony of Christ is shown, his prayer to the Lord. If it is possible, take this cup from me. And he wanted his disciples to be with him. They all just fell asleep. They couldn't stay awake.
He shouted, oh Father, why did you forsake me?
That's what one of the things that he said as he was actually hanging on the cross. That was part of the suffering he had to go through, feeling that he lost the connection with the divine knowledge. Maybe that it was all in vain. So, between Gethsemane and Calvary, he has to carry his cross through the streets of Jerusalem. They still mark the route that he took. And the people, the ordinary people, they were just shouting at him. Actually, they had chosen, no? The Roman governor. He said, look, there's this terrible thief and murderer, and there's this man here, I can't see any fault in him. Which one do you want me to release now? Barabbas. They chose that Jesus should be the one who was to be sacrificed. So on his way, as he's carrying the cross, they're all mocking him and jeering him. Only one or two people help. And there's one lady who comes and wipes his face. And there's somebody who, when Jesus falls, that man takes the cross on his shoulders and carries it. So that's his escort, the curses of the crowd. So they insult him, they jeer at him, and that's the only acknowledgement that he gets for this divine right, which is really his.
But one thief again is not. One thief.
Two thieves slain with him mock his mighty death. But in the traditional story they say that one thief mocked him and the other one said, well, look, we are all dying. Why?
One more. He wanted to save the world and he can't save himself, he said.
So he has blood-trod, he has followed with his brow bleeding because of this crown of thorns they made him wear. He's followed the Saviour's way, the Via Dolorosa. This is the way that the Saviour has to go to fulfill his sacrifice. And what does that mean? In the next sentence, Shraddhavan, next sentences, Shraddhavan explains the meaning of this sacrifice.
He who has found his identity with God pays with the body's death his soul's vast life. His knowledge immortal triumphs by his death.
Oh, this is what the Saviour experiences and knows, that he is one with God, that he's the representative of God. And that's how he can pay the debt. He has to pay for that vast light of his soul that gets punished under the present conditions of the world. He has to pay with the death of the body. And not just a death like that, a very, very painful death. But his knowledge triumphs because of that death. His knowledge is immortal and it triumphs. Dimension. Who watered on the scaffold as he falls. His crucified voice proclaims, I am God. Yes, all is God. He is that heaven's deathless God. So, with these lines, Shraddhavan shows that he's not only talking about Christ. When we say hewn, cut up, quartered on the scaffold, this is not just Christ. This is anybody who suffers for the sake of humanity. There have been so many who have suffered in so many different ways. But this is the one who has found his identity with God. He suffers and as a sacrifice. And that voice of the one who has suffered, crucified, proclaims, I am God. He acknowledges his oneness with the divine. Human beings can't stand that, have to punish that. But back comes, it says, yes, all is God. It's not only the one, the Saviour. He's acknowledging his oneness with all. Everything is God. We'll read one more sentence, Rosa.
The seed of Godhead sleeps in mortal hearts. The flower of Godhead grows on the world tree. All shall discover God in self and things.
This is the great message. All is good. So that seed of Godhead, it's there in our hearts waiting to sprout and to eventually flower. The flower of Godhead grows on the world tree, this tree of the material universe. Divinity can flower on that tree. It's not that God and earth are separate. All shall discover God in self and in things, not only in their own identity with God, but God in everything. That is the full realization. But when God's messenger comes to help the world, he has to face so many obstacles, and that long description continues. And at the end, what we read next week, we are told this is the inner war without escape. Shall we read this together? On line 264.
There is a clamour of battle, a tramp, a march. A cry arises like a moaning sea, a desperate laughter under the blows of death, a doom of blood and sweat and toil and tears. Men die that man may live and God be born. An awful silence watches tragic time. Pain is the hand of nature sculpturing men to greatness. An inspired labour chisels with heavenly cruelty an unwilling mould. Implacable in the passion of their will, lifting the hammers of titanic toil, the demiurges of the universe work. They shape with giant strokes their own. Their suns are marked with their enormous stamp of fire. Although the shaping God's tremendous touch is torture unbearable to mortal nerves, the fiery spirit grows in strength within and feels a joy in every titan pang. He who would save himself lives bare and calm. He who would save the race must share its pain. This he shall know who obeys that grandiose urge. The great who came to save this suffering world and rescue out of time's shadow and the law, must pass beneath the yoke of grief and pain. They are caught by the wheel that they had hoped to break. On their shoulders they must bear man's load of fate. Heaven's riches they bring, their sufferings count the price, or they pay the gift of knowledge with their lives. The Son of God, born as the Son of Man, has drunk the bitter cup, owned Godhead's debt, the debt the eternal owes to the fallen kind his will has bound to death and struggling life that yearns in vain for rest and endless peace. Now is the debt paid, wiped off the original score. The eternal suffers in a human form. He has signed salvation's testament with his blood. He has opened the doors of his undying peace. The deity compensates the creature's claim. The Creator bears the law of pain and death. A retribution smites the incarnate God. His love has paved the mortal's road to heaven. He has given his life and light to balance here the dark account of mortal ignorance. It is finished, the dread, mysterious sacrifice offered by God's martyred body for the world. Gethsemane and Calvary are his lot. He carries the cross on which man's soul is nailed. His escort is the curses of the crowd. Insult and jeer are his right's acknowledgment. 2 thieves slain with him mock his mighty death. He has trod with bleeding brow the Saviour's way. He who has found his identity with God pays with the body's death his soul's vast light. His knowledge, immortal, triumphs by his death. Hewn, quartered on the scaffold as he falls, his crucified voice proclaims, I am God. Yes, all is God, peals back heaven's deathless call. The seed of Godhead sleeps in mortal hearts. The flower of Godhead grows on the world tree. All shall discover God in self and thing.